My son didn't even open the envelope. He just looked at it, turned it over once in his hand, and set it on the edge of the gift table like it was a coupon circular that had come in the mail by mistake. Then he turned back to his guests, laughing at something his new business partner said, and I watched my envelope slide half off the table before the wind from the air conditioning finally pushed it to the floor. His wife, Cassandra, saw it happen. She glanced down, then at me, then away. Nobody picked it up. That was the moment I decided to say nothing. Not yet. Hey, quick question before we go any further. Have you ever worked your whole life building something, only to watch someone you love treat it like it was worthless? Drop a comment. I read every single one. And hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Some details here are fictionalized for storytelling, but the lesson is completely real. Now let me take you back to that evening, because what happened next changed everything. The grand opening of my son Marcus's restaurant was held on a Thursday night in September. 40 tables, linen napkins, a bar that glowed amber from the inside. The kind of place where the bread costs $8 and nobody complains. He'd named it Cassian's, which was Cassandra's idea, a blend of both their names. I'd thought about pointing out that his name wasn't in it at all, but I held my tongue. I'd driven 2 hours from Millhaven to get there. Wore the navy dress I'd bought for my sister's retirement dinner. I'd had my hair done the day before at the salon on Crescent Street where Denise had been cutting my hair for 22 years. I wanted to look like someone Marcus wouldn't be embarrassed to introduce. The restaurant was full. People I didn't know in clothes that cost more than my car payment, talking about investors and square footage, and a second location already being discussed for the spring. Marcus moved through the room like a man who had always belonged in it, shaking hands, accepting compliments, his dark jacket fitting perfectly. I waited near the gift table for 45 minutes before he found me. "Mom!" He kissed my cheek quickly, distracted already. "You made it! You look great!" He was scanning the room over my shoulder. "I made it." I handed him the envelope. "I wanted to give you this, something I've been saving for a long time." He took it without looking at it. "Thanks, Mom." He started to turn. "Marcus?" He paused. "Open it when you get a chance. It matters." He nodded, the way you nod at someone when you've already moved on inside your head, and went back to his guests. 20 minutes later, I watched his wife pick up my envelope from the floor and set it back on the table with a small, private smile on her face that she thought no one could see. I left before the dessert course. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the wheel and both eyes on the road. The way I'd taught myself to do when things hurt, and I didn't have time for the hurt. I'd learned that in 1987, the year Marcus's father left, and I became the only income in a 2-bedroom house with a 6-year-old who needed new sneakers and a leaking roof that needed a tarp from the hardware store on Route 9. I did not cry on the drive home, I thought. I'd built everything alone. When Marcus was small, I worked the breakfast shift at Dunmore Diner 6 days a week, then cleaned offices 3 evenings a month to cover what the tips didn't reach. When he was in middle school, I got my real estate license on my 3rd try, studying at the kitchen table after he went to sleep. When he was in high school, I started buying properties. Small ones, distressed ones that nobody wanted. Marcus knew I owned a few rental houses. That was all I'd ever told him, because I wanted him to work for his own life, not borrow against mine. He knew I was proud of him when he graduated from culinary school. He knew I'd given him $30,000 when he first tried to open a restaurant at 28, the one that failed after 11 months. What he didn't know was the rest of it. The envelope he'd let fall to the floor held the deed to the building his restaurant was sitting in. Not a copy of the deed. Not a congratulations card. The actual deed to the actual building. I'd bought the Callaway building 14 months ago through an LLC I'd operated quietly for 19 years. Marcus had signed a lease through his business attorney. negotiated what he thought was a good rate with what he thought was a commercial property management company called Birchfield Holdings. He'd bragged about the deal to me on the phone. Great bones, Mom. Landlord gave me a 5-year lease, reasonable terms. Said they don't usually do that with new tenants, but they believed in the concept. Birchfield Holdings was mine. My initials, my company, my building. Marcus had no idea he'd been negotiating with his mother. I got home at 11:30 and sat at my kitchen table in my navy dress for a long time. The envelope with the deed was still in my purse because I'd brought a copy, not the original. The original was in the fireproof box in my bedroom closet, tucked behind the winter coats I'd had since the Clinton administration. 41 property deeds, investment account statements, and a folder marked Marcus, Trust, which held the plan I'd always intended to execute on his 40th birthday, still 3 years away. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I sat with the silence for a while. It wasn't the envelope on the floor that had broken something in me. It was Cassandra's smile. Small and private and certain. The smile of someone who had already decided what I was worth before I walked through the door. I'd seen that smile before. I'd seen it from Marcus's college girlfriend who called me sweetie. I'd seen it from the bank manager in 1991 who told me women like me should focus on steady employment rather than property investment. I'd seen it from the men in suits at closings who assumed I was someone's assistant until I signed the check. This was my son's wife, wearing that smile at my envelope on the floor. In the morning, I made coffee, got dressed in my regular clothes, and called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Holden, and she'd handled my real estate transactions for 11 years. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment. "Penelope," she said, "that's your son's restaurant. I know whose restaurant it is." Another pause. "All right, I'll pull the lease documents." "Thank you, Patricia. I also need you to recommend an investigator, someone careful and thorough." She gave me a name without asking why. That was one of the things I appreciated about Patricia. His name was Dale Hutchins, former insurance fraud investigator, 23 years, now private. He had an office above a dry cleaner on Merchant Street and a handshake that told you immediately he had seen everything and been surprised by very little. We met on a Monday morning. I told him what I wanted to know about Marcus's business partner, a man named Griffin Mara, who had appeared in my son's life 8 months ago, and within 4 months had become a 40% co-owner of Cassian's. "I want to know who he is," I said, "where his money comes from, what he's done before this." Dale nodded and opened a yellow legal pad of his own. 4 days later, we met again. Griffin Mara, 41 years old, had opened 3 other restaurants under 2 different LLCs in the past 6 years. 2 had been dissolved. One had ended in a lawsuit from a former partner who claimed Griffin had redirected business revenue into personal accounts during the final year of operation. The lawsuit settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. The former partner, a chef named Roberto Salinas, was now working at a hotel kitchen in Phoenix and had told Dale, without much prompting, that he would never do business with Griffin Mara again. Griffin had presented himself to Marcus as a hospitality investor with deep connections and operational experience. The connections were real. The experience was selectively narrated. The money he'd brought to Cassian's, the $200,000 that Marcus had described to me as angel funding from a serious player, had come from a personal loan Griffin had taken against his condo. He didn't have deep pockets. He had deep debt and a talent for appearing to have the former. I asked Dale a question. "Is there anything illegal happening right now, at Cassian's specifically?" He tapped his pen on the pad. "Not that I can confirm yet, but the business account structure is irregular. 2 accounts receiving revenue deposits, only one being reported on the operating statements I could access. It may be nothing. It may not be. I need to know which." Give me another week. I gave him 2. In the meantime, Marcus called on a Sunday. He sounded light, happy. The opening had gone well. Reviews were coming in. The food critic from the Hargrove Gazette had given them 3.5 stars. Did you get a chance to look at what I gave you? I asked. He paused. Oh, yeah, the envelope. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it. Did you open it? I think Cassandra put it somewhere. We've been so slammed. Is it a check? I can have her find it. I said no, it wasn't a check. He should open it when he had a quiet moment. He said he would. He moved on to telling me about a new supplier in Vermont. I listened and said the right things, and after we hung up, I sat very still for a moment. He hadn't opened it. 4 weeks since the opening. He hadn't opened it. I went to my bedroom closet and stood in front of the fireproof box. I knew what was in it. I had built every piece of it across 38 years, $312,000 from an inheritance my grandmother left me in 1985. Money my mother had told me to put in savings that I had used instead to buy my first 2 properties. 12 more properties over the next decade. Then the LLC in 2005. Then the commercial properties. Then the market accounts. Current value, $29 million. Marcus thought his mother owned a few rental houses and drove a 10-year-old Subaru because she was comfortable but careful. He was half right about the careful. Dale called on a Wednesday. He had pulled the operating statements through a contact in commercial accounting. 2 streams of revenue, one reported, one routed through a separate account that had Griffin Mara's name on it, alongside a company called Mesa Strand LLC, which was registered in Nevada and had no public filings beyond its formation documents. What that means practically, Dale said, is that a portion of nightly revenue is being categorized as consulting fees to Mesa Strand and is not appearing on the official P&L statements Marcus files with his bank for the line of credit review, which means Marcus's bank thinks the restaurant is more profitable than it actually is. Yes. And Marcus doesn't know about this second account? Based on everything I can find, the account was opened by Griffin using the business tax ID, which Griffin had access to as co-owner. Marcus's name is not on it. The transactions are small enough that they likely haven't triggered any internal review yet. I let that sit for a moment. Is this bank fraud? It's consistent with patterns that get prosecuted as bank fraud, yes. The misrepresentation to the lender is the key element. How long before the bank notices? The line of credit comes up for review in 5 months. If the numbers don't hold up under scrutiny, it unravels then. Or sooner, if someone asks the right questions. I asked the right questions. All of them. Before I left, I had copies of everything Dale had gathered, organized in a manila folder. I did not call Marcus. I thought about it the way you think about touching a hot stove before you decide not to. If I called him, he would tell Griffin. Griffin would move the money, restructure the accounts, and find a way to make my son believe I was a suspicious old woman trying to interfere in his success. Because that was the story Marcus had been telling himself about me for years. That I was careful to the point of fear. That I didn't understand how modern business worked. That my instincts were from a different era. He wasn't wrong that I was from a different era. He was wrong about what I'd built in it. I did call Patricia. She already had the lease in front of her. Birchfield Holdings, that's you, has standard early termination provisions if the tenant is found to have engaged in misrepresentation on the original lease application. Griffin Mara co-signed that application. The commercial bank Griffin used for the line of credit required a clean business history declaration from both co-owners as part of the lending terms. Griffin had declared no prior litigation or business disputes. Roberto Salinas' lawsuit was a prior litigation and a business dispute. He had signed a false declaration to a bank. I sat with all of this information for 3 days. I made coffee in the mornings. I walked in the evenings. I thought about what I wanted. Not what felt satisfying in the short term, but what I actually wanted for my son and for myself. I wanted Marcus to understand what I had built and why. I wanted him to understand who Griffin Mara was before that understanding came from losing everything. I wanted to sit across from my son and have him look at me the way I had never quite managed to make him look at me. Not with guilt, not with duty, but with clear eyes. I called Patricia again on a Thursday morning and told her to draft a certified letter to Griffin Mara from Birchfield Holdings. The letter would outline the misrepresentation on the lease application and inform him that the landlord was reviewing its options under the early termination clause. It would be signed by Patricia, not by me. Griffin would not know who was behind Birchfield Holdings. Not yet. I also called Dale and asked him to compile everything into a format that could be handed to a bank's fraud department. Clean, sourced, organized. Dale asked if I wanted him to make the report. I said not yet. I wanted to be present when the truth arrived. I called Marcus on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the letter went out, and asked if he had time to meet for coffee that Sunday. He said yes, though he sounded distracted. He mentioned that there was some issue with a letter from their landlord, and Griffin was handling it. I said that sounded stressful. He said it was fine. Griffin had connections. I said I was sure he did. Sunday morning, a coffee shop called Morrow's on the east side of Hargrove. Checkered floor, good pie, and nobody who knew either of us. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a coffee that had gone mostly cold. He looked tired in the particular way that people look when something they've built is starting to feel unstable, and they haven't told anyone yet. He stood to hug me. "You look good, Mom." "Sit down," I said. "I want to show you something." I laid Dale's folder on the table between us. I walked him through it in the order that would hurt least and inform most. Griffin's prior lawsuit, Mesa Strand, LLC, the second revenue account, the false declaration to the bank. Marcus read without speaking. He turned pages slowly. Once, he stopped and looked up at me. "How did you get this?" "I hired an investigator." "When?" "About 6 weeks ago. After the opening." His jaw tightened. "Mom, I'm 37 years old. I don't need—" "You need to know your business partner is routing your restaurant's revenue into a private account and has misrepresented his business history to your lender." The silence was different after that. He went back to reading. He finished the folder and sat with his hands flat on the table. "Why didn't you just call me?" He said it quietly, without anger. Just tiredness. "Because you would have called Griffin first, and he would have explained it away. And you would have wanted to believe him, because you want this restaurant to work more than you want to be right about a person." Marcus looked at his coffee cup. "He's my partner. He signed a false statement to your bank. When the line of credit reviews in 5 months, that will surface. And when it does, your name is on the application beside his." Another silence. Longer. What do I do? I folded my hands on the table. First, you need your own attorney, separate from anyone Griffin recommended. Second, you need a forensic accountant to review every transaction in that second account and document what's missing from your P&L. Third, you need to know who your landlord actually is before you assume Griffin's connections will fix the letter. Why does the landlord matter? I looked at my son across a coffee shop table. He had his father's eyes and my mother's jaw, and 37 years of assuming certain things about me that he had never thought to question. "The landlord matters," I said, "because the landlord is me." He was very still for a moment. "I own the Callaway building. I bought it 14 months ago through a company called Birchfield Holdings. You've been my tenant since you signed that lease. The letter Griffin received last week came from my attorney. Marcus's mouth opened. I've owned 41 properties for the past several years, I continued. I have investment accounts, what I have given you in your life, the $30,000 for the first restaurant, the things I've quietly covered over the years. Those were small pieces of something much larger that I never told you about because I wanted you to build your own life without assuming mine would catch you. He looked like a man trying to locate the ground beneath him. Mom, the envelope I gave you at the opening, the one Cassandra put somewhere, held a copy of the Callaway building deed. I wanted you to know, on a good night, a night when things were working. I wanted to tell you that the building you'd chosen, the bones you loved, had been held by your mother since before you signed a single paper. Marcus put his head in his hands. We sat there for a while. The coffee shop moved around us. Someone ordered pie at the counter. A child at a nearby table dropped a spoon and laughed. You let me negotiate against you, he said finally. You negotiated a fair lease. Patricia made sure of that. He looked up. You have an attorney. I have several. He was quiet again. And Griffin? I slid a business card across the table. This is a contact at the bank's commercial fraud department. You should make that call before Griffin does. Get ahead of it. Show them you came forward voluntarily. Marcus took the card and held it like he wasn't sure how. I'm going to lose a lot here, aren't I? You might lose the partnership. You won't lose the restaurant. Not if you move quickly and document everything. He looked at the card. And the building? Are you? You have a valid lease. I have no intention of removing you from the building. What happens from here is between you and your attorney and the bank. Marcus sat back. He looked out the window for a moment at the Sunday morning street, and I watched something move across his face. Not relief? Not yet. Something more honest than relief. The look of someone who has been carrying a wrong idea for a long time and has just set it down. I should have opened that envelope. Yes, you should have. His eyes came back to mine. I let Cassandra put it somewhere. I should have. He stopped. She didn't want me to make a big deal of it. She said it was probably just a card. I thought about Cassandra's small, private smile. I said nothing about it. That was between Marcus and his wife. My job was the truth that was mine to tell. The rest would unfold the way things unfold when you finally stop managing the information. Marcus called me 4 days later. He'd met with an attorney. He'd also spoken with the bank, voluntarily, with documentation. The fraud department had opened a review of Griffin's account activity. Griffin had been formally removed from the Cassian's operating agreement pending the bank's findings. His voice on the phone was different. Quieter. Like someone who had slept badly, but had slept. I want to understand what you've built, he said. All of it. Will you sit down with me and explain it? Not today, I said, when you've handled what's in front of you. Fair enough. Then after a pause, Mom, why didn't you ever tell me any of it? I thought about how to answer that honestly, because money tells people who you are before you get the chance to show them. I wanted you to know me without the number. And instead, you knew me as someone easy to underestimate. I let that happen too long. He didn't argue. That was new. The bank completed their review 6 weeks later. Griffin Mara was referred to the district attorney's office for the false declaration and the misappropriation of business revenue. His condo was already leveraged. His other investments were under review. The connections he'd been counting on turned out to be connections to people who were watching their own exposure and not his. Marcus called me the night he heard. I just kept thinking, he said, about how close I came. If you hadn't, You would have found it eventually. Maybe. But after the line of credit review, after my name was in the same documents as his, I didn't say anything. I let him sit with that. "Can I take you to the restaurant?" he asked. "Saturday lunch? I want you to see it when it's not a zoo." I said yes. Saturday came cold and bright. Cassian's was half full at noon, the good kind of half full that means you're steady, not struggling. Marcus met me at the door and walked me through the dining room himself, explaining the menu decisions, the supplier relationships, the choice to keep the kitchen partially visible from the dining room so guests could see the work being done. He introduced me to his sous chef, a young woman named Deb who had trained in Charleston and had a handshake that meant it. He showed me the storage system, the prep schedule, the notebook he kept of every table's feedback going back to opening night. He was proud in a way he hadn't been at the opening. At the opening, he'd been performing. Here he was, just showing me something real. We sat at a corner table after the lunch rush thinned. Marcus ordered us both the roasted vegetable soup and bread that was not, in fact, $8, though it tasted like it should be. "I want to talk about the building," he said. "All right. I want to eventually buy it from you. Properly. Market rate, financing, everything above board, but I want to be honest about what I can do now versus in a few years once the numbers are cleaner." That's a good way to think about it. He wrapped his hands around his soup bowl. "There's something else." I waited. Cassandra and I had a long conversation about the opening, about the envelope. He looked at the table. She knew what it probably was. She'd seen the name on the return address label and looked up Birchfield Holdings and found some property records. She thought... He stopped. She thought if I knew you owned the building, I'd feel like everything I'd done was just you setting it up for me. Like I hadn't actually built anything. I looked at my son carefully. "She should have told you and let you decide." He nodded slowly. "Yes, she should have. This isn't something I can resolve for the two of you," I said. "It's yours to work through." "I know." He looked up at me. "But I want you to know I understand now. What you were trying to give me wasn't a safety net. It was a history. The deed was the story of how you built it." I picked up my spoon. "Something like that," I said. He watched me for a moment. "Do you really still work? Drive out to the properties yourself?" "Most of them I have a management company for now. But the ones in Millhaven I still check myself." "Old habit. That doesn't make financial sense." I smiled. "It makes sense to me." He shook his head, almost laughing. "And you still live in that same house?" "I like that house." "Mom," he leaned forward slightly. "You could live anywhere. I know where I could live. I chose where I do." He sat back and looked at me across the table in his restaurant on a Saturday afternoon with the winter light coming through the front windows, and I watched him finish understanding something that had taken him a long time to even know he needed to understand. That night, I drove the 2 hours back to Millhaven, hung up my coat, put water on for tea, sat at my kitchen table in the quiet. On the wall above the table, I had framed one piece of paper. Not a deed, not a certificate. The original lease agreement for my first rental property, signed in 1988. Eleanor Price, tenant. Penelope Marsh, landlord. Rent $250 a month. Eleanor had stayed for 9 years. She raised her daughter in that house. When she finally moved to be closer to her grandchildren in Tucson, she wrote me a card that I still had somewhere in a drawer. "You gave us a home when nobody else would," she'd written. I don't think you knew what that meant. I had known. That was the whole point. Every property after Eleanor's had been the same point, made over and over. A home is not a trophy. It is not a status marker. It is a place where someone's life unfolds. My son was beginning to understand the difference between building something for appearance and building something that held. Tomorrow, I would go back to work. Not because I had to, because work is not a punishment for people who don't deserve better. Work is what better looks like, from the inside. The passbook my son's business partner had tried to drain, the restaurant my son had almost lost, the building he didn't know his mother owned, none of that was the real inheritance. The real inheritance was what I'd done with 38 years of early mornings and second jobs and a yellow legal pad on a kitchen table when everyone else was asleep. The real inheritance was the understanding, coming slowly to Marcus now, that what your mother carries in her hands and what she carries in her heart are not always the same thing. And that a woman who has spent her life being underestimated is not waiting for you to recognize her. She has already built something you will spend years learning the shape of. And if you're listening to this, if you have ever been the person in the room who everyone looked past, I want you to know something. The work you do is not small because the paycheck is. The life you are building is not lesser because nobody can see the blueprints yet. Keep the receipts. Keep the records. Keep going. Because one day, someone is going to look down at the ground beneath their feet and realize, too late or just in time, that it was yours all along. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Subscribe to Opal Revenge for more stories about women who built quietly and showed up when it mattered. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their work has dignity. Some elements of this story have been fictionalized for storytelling. But the truth underneath? That one's real.